You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
The question you should ask yourself, which frame of reality are you buying into in this moment? Is it yours? Are you doing the things that are in alignment with what you want to do? Or are you buying into someone else's frame of reality? And it's okay to buy into someone else's frame of reality, but it's not okay to do it unconsciously. It's not okay to do it without realizing you're doing it. And that shows up in little ways, right? Like, I'm buying into Chipotle's frame of reality when I buy Chipotle. I didn't even know seed oils were a thing or that there were better ways for my nutrition. I just bought into that. And now I have more knowledge and information by virtue of doing the podcast. That's kind of a side tangent. But the point is that my parents gave me freedom to explore my own curiosities in this way. When I was 15, I started a Knicks blog and I interviewed NBA players. And I'm doing all these things, and it's like, this is just what's coming through me, and I didn't question it, except when a 40-year-old woman tells me that I should not do it.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you. Danny, welcome to the Break Podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. How are you?
I'm doing phenomenal as well. I got my second workout of the day in, and as I was finishing up my lifting session, I was listening to something that has sparked where we're going to start this conversation. But first, I just want to tell you and tell our audience why I wanted to have you on this podcast and why I kind of went after you as a guest. So I really wanted to, I think when I reached out to you, I said, you remind me of myself when I was younger. And I think as I dug into your story, I found that was total bullshit. You are far ahead of where I was when I was younger. And it really made me, in terms of going after your purpose and being really grounded in the things that matter in this life, and then figuring out how to make a living at that. That's what I have admired about you from a distance. And I feel like you are part of what I would call a cohort of younger folks. Let's call you millennials or Gen Z. I don't know exactly what your or how old you are, but of people that I have come in contact with that are just exuding wisdom and balance and purpose on a level that I have not seen with that generation. And I think it's that I think it's a bad rap. And you have made me more confident about the future for my kids who are coming up behind you. So I wanted to thank you for that, first of all, and thank you for sharing your time with us today.
I appreciate all the kind words and the reflection. I think, we're all trying to understand ourselves better. And when we put out so much content on the internet, that is one way to get a signal into who we are. So I appreciate you saying all those things and listening to the podcast or reading the tweets or whatever it is that connected with you. And I appreciate it tremendously. Thank you.
All right, well, let's kick this thing off. The first thing I got to say is I want to say hi to your mom and your grandma. I know they listen to everything that you do, and I hope this conversation will be good enough that you'll say, "Hey, mom and grandma, listen to my conversation with Mike because it was pretty good." So I want to say hi right off the bat to get it going. But I was going to start in a different place, and while I was working out today, I was lifting weights and I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to one more thing from Danny. The last thing I listened to from you was what you posted today, which was something different. It was a short 4 odd minute, basically iPhone voice recording of you talking about this idea of belief. And and I think your idea with this is to get some short form and just get things that are on your mind out and published on your podcast. But this idea of belief is so meaningful and such a strong driver of alignment and success. I want to understand from your point of view, how someone builds belief in themselves and in what they do if they don't have that innately.
Yeah. So I think it's hard for me to answer because my belief starts from my mom and grandma. So it's funny that it's like the conversation isn't supposed to start there, but it really does for me. Like that was the baseline. I knew I was loved. I knew everything I was doing was in addition to their love, and I wasn't trying to get their love. And that's true for my dad and grandpa as well. Like everyone in my family, I felt loved by. And because of that, it's just a sense of appreciation for every moment. But if you don't have that, I think seeking out the things that are interesting to you or the people you admire, or if you start with the people you admire, why do you admire that person? Let's say you don't believe in yourself and no one believes in you, which I find that is probably a very low percentage of people. Not one person believes in you, but let's just say that's the case. Well, then you have to find the belief in the people who have achieved what you aim to achieve. And you have to find the belief in that person did it. That person inspires me, or that person did something that makes me feel good. Why is that the case? And that, I believe, is how you start to find belief in yourself, is to first look at the person who you admire. And then after that, you start to ask yourself, what did that person do? And once you start to do the actions that they did themselves, you will start to believe, because there's no other thing you can do if you are doing the daily actions in alignment with the person you want to be. And you know that's the person you want to be because you inherently admire them. So yeah, that's my thought.
It's looking to a person that has done what you are thinking of or wanting to do before, and as evidence and proof that it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
And if theoretically, if you take similar actions and if you commit in a similar fashion, there's no reason why you can't get to that point as well. So seeing a runway, if you will, or seeing a path to do something is interesting. So you talked about how you were raised and your family in that belief system. My feeling is a lot of people, at least I come from a very similar background. I was unconditionally, I was loved. I was told you could do whatever you want. But there's still like the belief in the, I should say, like ability to let their child then go wherever they want, right? It seems like you were very supported. You were supported in a way that not a lot of people, at least that I know, were supported, right? A lot of people that I know, yes, you're loved, we love you, you can do whatever you want, sky's the limit, but also, guidance, get a good job, go to school, like do all of these kind of things coming from a very good place, right? How is your growing up different from maybe what I just described?
I had that growing up.
Okay.
My mom and dad, they needed me to go to college. Like they wouldn't feel complete in themselves if I didn't go to college. But I knew at 15 that I didn't want to go. Right. So that kind of brought me down a path of like, I'm not following my purpose. I'm not following my calling. And I'm going to pay the price for that. Looking back on it, that is so clear what happened to me. And I think you pay the price for it when you have a calling, you have a pursuit, or you have a purpose and you don't live into it. Like there will be something that happens on the other side of that. For me, it was drinking. It was just doing things that were not in alignment with any version of myself today that I would consider helpful to myself or the world. And I was in a constant state of that. So, I mean, I was pushed to go to school, but I think my parents after that kind of understood that I had done the deal. The deal being like, you go to college and you get your degree and then you can. And so that's why I kind of consider myself like 5 years old or 6 years old. I'm 28 because I'm like, I've only been living for 5 or 6 years. So there's a lot for me to learn. And I'm still young in the world of living. And I'm excited to, continue watching that journey unfold. But my parents didn't put any pressure on me after college.
The versions of this that I've heard and seen and heard you talk about, are very unique from the standpoint of you had a very strong conviction of direction at a very young age.
Yes.
And you had, so 13, 14, 15 years old. Describe that to us. And then I want to ask a couple of follow-up questions because I think people get that feeling. I want you to describe that feeling, but I think people get that feeling in their 30s, in their 40s, when they're all of a sudden saying, shit, I could do something else. But just describe how that was as a teen.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 12 years old, I wrote a Little League blog for my Little League baseball team. And we'd play a game and then I'd write a report about what happened and I'd post it on a website that I created. And that was pretty cool. And people enjoyed that. Like people had a good experience of me doing that, of me showing what happened in the game because no other 12-year-olds were covering a Little League baseball team. Then at 13, I really enjoyed writing and I started writing about time management and becoming a happier person and finding your purpose and finding your calling. Because to me, that's just what felt right intuitively. Now, I don't know where I got this idea to do that from. That's just what was in me. And I did that for 3 months, but it was very foundational for me because I enjoyed it. But I also wanted to be a normal kid. And there was also a story of a woman telling me that this is definitely not a 13-year-old kid. And this kid should not be posting on the internet. And I was like, you know what? She's right. I do want to be a normal kid. And I bought into her frame of reality in that moment. And I think that's important because like the question you should ask yourself, the person listening to this right now, or myself in the future is like, which frame of reality are you buying into in this moment? Is it yours? Are you doing the things that are in alignment with what you want to do? Or are you buying into someone else's frame of reality? And it's okay to buy into someone else's frame of reality, but it's not okay to do it unconsciously. It's not okay to do it without realizing you're doing it. And that shows up in little ways, right? Like I'm buying into Chipotle's frame of reality when I buy Chipotle. I didn't like even know seed oils were a thing or like that there were better ways for my nutrition. I just bought into that. And now I have more knowledge and information by virtue of doing the podcast. That's kind of a side tangent. But the point is that my parents gave me freedom to explore my own curiosities in this way. When I was 15, I started a Knicks blog and I interviewed NBA players. And I'm doing all these things and it's like, this is just what's coming through me. And I didn't question it, except when a 40-year-old woman tells me that I should not do it. So.
Right. It's so interesting because I think that's, the vast majority of us working people out in the world, right, have unconsciously bought into a really big frame, which is you go to school, you go get a job, you work hard, you sacrifice, you do all of these things, right? And so that's a big part of the conversations that I have is, okay, great, you're here. But you get to choose what you're going to buy into, in your words, going forward. And that is really, it's so interesting. And in the story you tell about a 40-year-old woman kind of, ruining your frame at that moment, that is what we literally do to kids today, isn't it? I mean, we have such a hard time as adults letting go of these limiting beliefs or factors in ourselves. And we end up projecting them onto the next Danny Miranda at 13 years old, which is so interesting to me.
Yes. And I think a lot of it is believing shoulds instead of believing this is the way it is. Right? You should go to school. You should get that job. You should start that business. Or what is the way it is? And what do you enjoy about it? And how is this moment unfolding? And how could you be more present to the creation? And how can we sit with it and be like, where would I like to take this if I could take this anywhere? What would I do if money were no option? And just to play with those ideas and those questions. If I could give you $1 billion for you to stop doing what you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. I saw that tweet that you put up. That's totally true. You're not living your purpose.
Yeah. I mean, like I was on a run when I thought that. And I was like, you can't get me to stop running for $1 billion. So what does that mean? Like, that is really interesting to me because what's going on there?
That is a very interesting question for sure. The idea of purpose. And you talk about, I know you've maybe struggled to figure out what are the words that I use around this? And I think you've come, at least maybe the latest iteration is sort of soul's purpose, which I think is really interesting to me, because I've struggled with it as well. How do I call it success? No, like, what do we call this thing? But to me, it is the only way. It is the North Star. It is the directional guide to you becoming the best version of yourself. But to a lot of people, it's sort of woo-woo. It's, no, let me be more practical. How do we flip that script in America for sure? But like, how are the conversations you're having to flip that script of, no, let purpose be your guiding light?
I guess I'm open to hearing how it works out for people whose purpose isn't their guiding light. Right? I only know from my experience. And my experience is I went down the rabbit hole of women. I went down the rabbit hole of money. I went down the rabbit hole of school in some sense. I went down all these different rabbit holes in an attempt to figure out what I was supposed to do with my time. And every single time I went down a rabbit hole that was linked to someone in the outside world, it didn't work. And every time I went down a rabbit hole that was based on my own intuition, my own desires, it has worked. And I don't necessarily mean it has worked externally. I mean, it has worked internally, meaning I'm showing up with more joy, more presence, more ability to live in my day-to-day. And so what is that all about? I don't know. And I guess my attempt isn't to tell anyone what they should or shouldn't do, even though sometimes it may come off as me doing that. The truth is, I'm just saying from what's inside of me and what I've experienced and what the experiments that I've run, this is what is working for me.
So you've interviewed a lot of people who have made a change they've maybe been really successful, chased money, chased external success measures, and now we're at a point where they're really reorienting around the internal guidance and purpose, or soul's purpose, as you would call it. Like Jason Howerton kind of comes to mind, like the episode I listened to with him. What have you learned from some of these folks about that process of being off of their purpose and reorienting? Like, do you have to hit a point where there's a big sort of breakdown or problem? Do you have to hit a rock bottom for that to happen? Or how are people coming to this conclusion and reorienting? What are the steps?
I've found that it often happens from a rock bottom, but it's unclear whether the rock bottom occurs in hindsight, and that's the narrative that you create around it. I know that personally, like in February of 2020, I was so down, like I couldn't, get out of bed. I was like, what's the purpose of doing anything? And it's, I think what's really helped people that I've spoke to is checklists. And this is what worked for me in the beginning as well, was I would just put 5 things or 3 things that I thought would lead me to a better place if I did them every day for the rest of the year. I just put them on a 3x5 index card, and I built that momentum by literally staring down the page and making a physical thing and checking off. I've done that, in February of 2020 or March of 2020 rather. I did that in September of 2019 with 75 Hard, and it is that. The process of just checking something off when you feel like you can't do anything. Like maybe the thing is like, I'm going to take 5,000 steps today, right? Like that's a possibility. If you're literally in bed every day, which I was in February 2020, like taking 5,000 steps in a day is significant. And then if you write the next day, I did 5,000, maybe 6,000 the following. So I think checklists are really important. And I think I was thinking about this concept. I can't remember where it comes from, but it's like we go from dissatisfied to satisfied to flourishing. When somebody is in their purpose, they're flourishing, right? So like they're living with enthusiasm, they're living with joy, they're helping and bring that to other people. And the advice is for the dissatisfied. But I think finding your purpose often comes when you're satisfied, when you have a baseline, when you're able to say to yourself, okay, like I can do the things I say I'm going to do. Now what? Right? So it's like talking to different people in that answer, but hopefully someone took that and could actually do something with it.
It's a really good breakdown because you're totally right. All the advice goes towards the dissatisfied, but it's the satisfied that are lulled into a complacent life and can benefit from the concept of, I think about the entrepreneurial concept of like creative destruction. You think about like Netflix going in and completely upending and destroying their printing money business, which was deliver, DVDs in the mail. And they said, no, the future is streaming. We're going to go all in on this. And it's going to be really rough for the business for a couple of years, but we're going to come out flourishing, essentially. And that's the type of work that I try to do with people is, okay, you're here, but how are you feeling? Is it satisfied? Is it flourishing? Where could you be? Where's the highest version of yourself that you could pursue for your family? For, how can you re-engineer work to not necessarily make more money, but to be more present and be around? And that word flourishing, I don't know if you know this, but you probably do, but there's a Greek word for it called eudaimonia, I think is the word. And it's basically means, the closest translation is human flourishing. And that's sort of like the highest pursuit, so going back to like Greek literature and all of that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting that you broke it down into advice is targeted to the dissatisfied, but the middle that's really not being attended to is the sort of satisfied, complacent person.
Yeah. And being satisfied with life is good, but it's also bad because you're accepting good instead of great. And it could sometimes be, it's hard to make a change in the satisfied area. It's harder to make a change when it's like, all right, everything's pretty good. Like, what do I have to complain about? But you can have more joy. Like then maybe you can't, but like, I know that the moments that I've been satisfied, I know now I could have more joy. I could have more purpose. I could have more connections. I could have more people who inspire me in my life. I could to me, that's the tricky part, the satisfied, the people, myself included, who were satisfied at some point. Just like right. There's so much more.
Right. You make a couple 100,000, 300,000 K. You're a VP. You've got a family, a golf course, a country club. You got a house. You got all of these comforts of life. You are not satisfied as a person. And I think the thing that people really have a hard time grappling with is, I always ask, like, what are you willing to give up to attain that happiness? And people have a really hard time in their minds going from sort of dollars and status to happiness, and that is a really interesting conversation. So I always ask people, you can do anything. What are you willing to trade? And that really gets people thinking about what steps they're willing to take to re-engineer things and redesign things in their life to get more happiness, and what the benefits are, kind of the downstream benefits.
Why do you think that question is so powerful?
I don't think people have really thought about it in that way. And I think it's also brings up a lot of fear. So people who have attained a certain status or level of comfort, let's say you're 40, you're an executive, you got kids, you got a house, you got driving a BMW and whatever, all this stuff. The idea of possibly going backwards at all is super, super scary to people. Like, okay, I could go downsize my house and be way more happy. Like, I don't have to, there's nothing I have to worry about. I don't have to deal with this debt problem. Like, I could go live in Bali with my kids and, we could have all these great experiences. People daydream about that stuff. But then when the realities hit, the fear is in, what are people going to think if I get rid of my BMW, or I start saying no to the country club, or I downsize my house? Like, that idea of what are people going to think? And I think you've talked about this before, the FOPO, fear of other people's opinions or whatever. and I hadn't really heard that before, but it's such a driver at the level, like kind of the mid-career, executive level. It's such a driver that people are like, damn, okay, this means I can't have it all, or maybe I can't have it all in the short term. That this is going to be a more gradual process and I have to make some decisions. That's where it hits people between the eyes, I think.
It must be really difficult because you've created an environment and you've created an ideal that you're looking at now, and it's not actually the ideal.
Exactly. And it switches. It's, I was driving towards this version of success, which was get a great job, climb the ladder, have lots of money, buy the McMansion, all of these things. I've been on that path for 20 odd years. And now as I rethink this, I'm coming to grips with, I was wrong at some point, in my life. And that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to have pushed yourself for 20 years down a wrong path. And the way I talk to people about that, the question I ask them is, well, do you think it was fair that the 18-year-old version of yourself or 20-year-old version of yourself that made those decisions, that they should essentially be responsible for planning the rest of your life? And most people are like, well, no, I was a freaking kid, So those are really interesting conversations to have with people about changing their view on what's important. Is in stopping chasing these external motivators and start to live your life by that internal scorecard, and you consciously defining what success is for you. So what your purpose is, what success is, like that is it's hard. It's very difficult and it takes a lot longer than people want, but there's a big pain there, which is really interesting because people come in and they're just like, I am not happy and I don't know why. I should be.
And that's why it's important to find it as young as you can.
Absolutely.
And you can find it young, and I don't think it has to take a long time. I think it's as simple as asking yourself, what made your 5-year-old self or 10-year-old self filled with joy? And what were you doing for the sake of doing? I was writing newsletters, right? Yeah. Like they're out there on the time machine. So I think it's going back to that person and then having the courage to act on that without potentially understanding where's the money going to come from or what's going to happen exactly. Just trusting, like it will work out. Like it could work out, and believing in yourself enough to follow that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's like getting the creative space to say, all right, well, what really drove me at 5 was I loved baseball. Well, what about that? It's going deeper than just baseball. It was what about that? Yeah. And going levels deeper. Because when you pull that stuff out, then you can find stuff to do that uses that. I call it an advantage. Like when you're doing things that you love, you're using that and that's fueling you forward and stuff becomes easy. Mountains become, easier to surmount and all this kind of stuff. It's an absolute advantage. I think the caveat with people who have established a life is in creating some logical midterm plan, right? Yeah. Around, like you can't just go, you can just go sell the house and liquidate all of your assets and say F you to this world. But like, nobody really wants to do that in practice. So creating like some type of logical bridge plan to that is something we kind of have to work on. And that takes some time and some work. But all right, enough about me and stuff that we do. But what we're talking about is really relatable.
You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
I want to go back to September-ish 2019 because you've alluded to it a couple times. being down, being depressed, being in kind of a broken down moment. How does someone like Danny, who knows what he wants to do at a really young age and is exuding energy all over the place, right? You're known for your energy. How does someone like you get to that point? I've been there 100 times, but I want to know how you get to that point.
Yeah, it feels like I've been there 100 times as well. I think I get to that point because I start believing other people's stories without even realizing that I was. I start taking jobs and finding ways of making money that are in alignment with my soul's purpose. Like that's the only way I can justify it or understand it today. And you do that long enough, it leads to a break. It leads to a moment of, are you silly? Do you not get the message? You think this is what you're put on here to do, to get some green stuff and like live in the most beautiful place? This was the hard part for me, is I got everything I wanted. I lived in San Diego. I was with my best friend from college. I was working out every day. And through all of that, I still said to myself, I'm not happy. I can't get myself to do work. I can't get myself to do a job that's very easy. I'm procrastinating by listening to Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss.
Yeah.
Right? So you get to that point because you don't follow what's inside. You follow what other people think you should put inside. And that's why I say, turn off my podcast and listen to yourself. If you don't know, because I don't have the answers for you. You have the answers for you. And you sit in a room for enough times and enough days in a row, it will, by yourself, with your eyes closed, you will find the answers. And that's the crazy part. From September 2019 to September 2020, I meditated every day practically, other than February of 2020 when I was depressed out of my mind in January. But I was meditating for the majority of days. And the result of that is the thing that I feel called on this earth to do. That's not a coincidence. And so I guess I got to that point because I followed other people's stories, and I got out of that point by listening to the truth of who I actually was and what I was put here to do.
So the stories you followed, I mean, I know one of them was obviously with your parents, like you got to go to college, but what were the other stories that you were following?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one story that I was following, I didn't even realize I was following, was about, I logged onto Twitter in June of 2018. I don't want to work for anyone is the narrative and script in my head. And I start going down this rabbit hole of e-commerce and copywriting. And I'm like, okay, like I can do this. And I start to do it. I'm like, all right, e-commerce, I can make a bunch of money this way. I see a lot of people my age making money this way. I'm gonna start doing this. I did it. It never clicked. It never felt right. It never felt like this is the right thing. I pushed myself to do it. And the stories that they were telling me was like, you can make money doing e-commerce.
Yeah.
And I believe that.
Yeah.
That was the dominant one.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a really interesting point that I think a lot of people get pulled into. And I mean, I love talking to a lot of the creators in the space, but my view is that the work that you and I are describing around purpose and your curiosity and interest and what is pulling you to do things needs to come first, or is at least more important, because the skills themselves can be learned in a certain sequence whenever you need to do that. But you have to sit in a room by yourself, 100% true, and figure out and be honest first with yourself, and attuned and attentive to what's driving you, what you're running from.
Yes.
I mean,
you're scared. The thing you're scared to fail at.
Yeah. What is that and why? And because usually the things you're scared to fail at are the things that you actually, that the obstacle is away, right? Like that is where you're supposed to end up being. And in your procrastination, you're just fighting that. I feel like it's so interesting. Somebody should make a meme of this for you. I feel like, of you procrastinating by listening to Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss while completely ignoring your calling. I mean, that's so funny to me.
And so if you procrastinate right now, not you, but anyone, and this is what I think about when I'm procrastinating anything. I can't remember the last time I procrastinated something, but I always ask myself, what am I doing in that time? And ask yourself, what are you doing in that time? That holds some keys that you've shut off in your own hero's journey. It really does.
100%. So I want to ask, like, we all get in ruts, and you talked a little bit about checklists and things like that. One of the seminal moments, I mean, one of the first times I really started listening to you was this, when you started talking about Andy Frisella and 75 Hard and how that program changed your life. But there was the meditation component and 75 Hard. And I would love for you to talk to us about, like, sort of why meditation. Why was that a thing for you? How did that pop on your radar as a solution for your predicament? And also, why 75 Hard?
Yeah, so all of this is in hindsight. When I was down and really bad, down bad, I was like, I'll do anything to stop feeling this way. And one thing that I can do, I know I can do these daily actions every day. I know no one can tell me that I can't do these actions because they're reliant on my own behavior. So I was like, I'm going to meditate and I'm going to do 75 Hard. Where does 75 Hard come from? I don't know. I just stumbled across it and it felt right to me. So I followed that call. And then meditation was from my friend Tej Dosa. I was following Tej at Comedic Bizman on Twitter for about a year or two at that point. And I was like, there's something different about this guy. Everyone else I follow about copywriting, about business, about all this stuff, all those people, they're doing it kind of from ego. It felt like they were like fighting and like angry. And Tej was like, listen, you can make a lot of money and love a lot of people and just like be love. And I was like, what is that? Like, that's different than everything else. What is this guy on? What does he do? So I formed a friendship with Tej. And when I finished 75 Hard the first day, I was like, yo, let's do 75 Hard. And I told him about it. And he was like, yeah, man, immediately. He was like, let's do it. And so he did the program with me. And every day we would text each other at the end of the day and be like, yo, day 1 is complete, day 5, whatever. And so I just saw he felt different and his tweets were different and infused with more love. And if I really think about it, that's why I was attracted to meditation, but I didn't even think it would work for the first 90 days of me doing it. And I didn't think it was working the entire time. So he kind of led you to meditation. You kind of led him to the physical challenge. Yeah. What I think is so interesting about those two things, I mean, the meditation is one, it's like, okay, we just finished talking about how you have to sit with yourself to figure some of this stuff out. So meditation is one way that you can really, or maybe, depending on how you define it, the only way that you can really sit with yourself. And then 2 is the physical challenge of doing something really hard is a way for anyone to start building belief back and confidence back in who they are. I think like those 2 things are almost prerequisites to getting out of some type of funk. And to transcend themselves. I'm starting to run now, and it's like, I feel like there's something spiritual about this, like in a real way. How did you get into running? Because I remember kind of a few months back or whatever it was, seeing that and being like, oh, he's getting into running. How did that come about? So my grandpa ran marathons after he was 40. He started when he was 40. He played tennis during his life, but like really got serious about marathons and triathlons. And that always stayed with me and always felt like that was on my path at some point. My dad ran a marathon as well. And my friends started running a lot. And I just started noticing it and picking up on it. And I was like, oh, all right, we're running now. Let's do it. And I did light, I started in April, May, and then I started liking it a lot in June, July, taking it seriously, and now a month and a half to doing my first marathon. So very excited about that. Are you doing one in Austin, or where is the marathon? Memphis, in St. Jude's. Yeah. Oh, very cool. Yeah. Yeah, there is like the runner's high is kind of real. I found that it's just a way to zone out. It's meditative. It's you in the road. When people ask me like, how do you start to run longer distances? I'm like, all you do is in your mind, go get to the next crack in the sidewalk, get to the next crack in the sidewalk. That's breaking down the process, into manageable chunks. So your physical routine is one of
you think that's very important, and it's one of both strength training and cardio training. How do you view those as working together to sort of support your mission, your energy, however you feel like they help you?
Yeah, I think cardio for me has been mental, and strength training is physical, is how I view it. It's really like progress is addictive, and they both give me so much, and you have to be smart too. Like I'm stretching a lot now, and I'm only strength training like twice a week, and I'm doing pull-ups and push-ups, but it's like there's a season for everything. And like there's no right way to do it. And I love that.
Yeah. Everything's a cycle, rest and recovery. You break yourself down. If you go too far, you have to, especially at my age, you have to recover a little bit better, which is so interesting. So Dan Go is a guy that really got me more into strength training.
Nice.
I had done marathons and all the way up to Ironman distance stuff. So I was just, doing that. And now I'm 42. So thinking about longevity and thinking about the next, phase of my life, it was like, this just makes sense. Like I need to be making sure I strength train and I'm strong for my kids and my family and all of that. But so I do a combination of both as well. I've been running and lifting, and I think both of those, you're totally right. I think it's the mental and the physical aspects that make it worthwhile and make it work together. Speaking of him, he asked me to ask you about something, and you've been asked this a bunch of times, but since he asked me to ask you, I'll do it. Talk to our audience about your sort of dream of selling out Madison Square Garden and where that comes from.
Yeah, I think ambition is holy in some sense. I think ambition to strive for a better future like really helps us be on a path. It really helps us understand where we're going, and it helps us ask ourselves, is the daily actions that we're doing in alignment with the person that I want to be? The person that I want to be wants to sell out Madison Square Garden for a live podcast because on December 8th, 2020, I asked myself, what's the biggest vision that I can imagine? I love doing this. I'm getting signs from the universe that I should continue doing this. So how far out can I imagine in this moment? And in my parents' basement, I was imagining selling out Madison Square Garden. And I still imagine that to this day. And it seems a little more possible today than it did 3 years ago, that's for sure. And it's what happens when you are acting in alignment with your soul's purpose. Is you just dream big because you want to keep playing forever. If I never sell out Madison Square Garden, that is amazing because I get to keep playing my dream forever. If I do, that's also amazing. I get to share the experience of so many incredible people in one room together, like elevating consciousness and energy. And that's kind of how I view it. And the Founders Podcast and Patrick O'Shaughnessy, I think they sold out Webster Hall, which is in New York City, and another venue. I got to look up how many seats they sold, but incredible. And it shows where podcasts are going and what podcast executed at the highest level actually looks like for a live event. So right now that's Webster Hall. I bet in 5 years they can get Madison Square Garden, but yeah, that's the vision.
So when this happens for you, who are you going to be interviewing in that moment?
I think it's going to be 10 guests. That's what yeah.
Who's on that list?
There's no one on that list right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Madison Square Garden, because you grew up in Long Island, right? And you were a Knicks fan. And so MSG just holds that nostalgia for you.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Thank you for filling in those details.
No problem. All right. So I know one of the things that you took from an early interview with Gary Vee was to always reach out to your heroes. And you've been able to do that on a good scale because of what you do. I'm really curious to know who your heroes are that you haven't reached out to or are afraid to reach out to at the point you're at now, and why?
There's no one I'm afraid to reach out to. But the way I do things is so interesting. It's completely by feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like people ask me, what's your CRM? What's the process? I'm like, dude, I just follow my energy.
Yeah.
If my attention is directed at someone or something, I'm just honing in on it. And I'm asking myself, what about this is fascinating? Why is my energy and why is my consciousness going in this direction? There's something here. So Deion Sanders is like my number one dream guest for the podcast. I'm not afraid to reach out to him by any means. I just understand that I'm doing so much work every day. Like every day I watch like at least 10 minutes of Deion Sanders. And I know all of that work that I'm doing every single day, brick by brick, is going to lead to a phenomenal interview when it is supposed to happen. I know he's got a new book out March of 2024. So maybe it'll happen then, right? And it's like, I view it all unfolding perfectly as it is supposed to happen. I mean, this is why I believe so much in like the woo-woo stuff, the consciousness, soul's purpose, like all, like, how do you explain this? On November 24th, 2020, I start writing in my notes questions for Gary Vaynerchuk. I had posted 20 episodes of my podcast, and I was watching an interview and I was like, oh, why did he get Kanye West.tv? Oh, why did he talk about his grandma like this? Okay, so I just wrote those down in a notes file. November 24th, 2020. On December 4th, 2020, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later maybe, he agrees to come on the podcast. There was no reason, quote unquote, that he should have come on. It was too soon for him to actually come on. But the fact that I would be writing questions for him and then actually have him on the show to ask him those questions 1 month later was unfathomable, unbelievable, but very believable and very fathomable because it happened.
How did you, what was it reach out like for somebody like that?
So it was on Twitter. I posted on Twitter a list of my dream guests, and he was one of the 5. And then someone commented and was like, oh, it'd be amazing if you had Gary Vee. And then I was like, oh, wait, I remember I wrote a blog post about Gary Vee when I was 13. And so I tweeted that blog post. Then he followed me. Then I tweeted that he followed me. And then people went off in the comments about how he has to go on the podcast. And it was like, I didn't do anything. I just followed my energy. And that led to that night him saying, I'll do it. Let's go.
What's so interesting about Twitter and LinkedIn, social media, and I was always I don't like social media guy. But what I realized about it is it is literally the mechanism of you putting out your energy into the world. Like
Yes.
you can sit down and meditate, and you can do all of this stuff about, externalizing all of this stuff, but you can actually push a button and put it into the world. And it
Yes.
goes out in zeros and ones, but it's in the universe. I find that so fascinating.
Yes. It's just communication at scale. It's just communicating with you. It's communicating with, like, in this moment. It's communicating when we post this to people. It's communication nonstop. It's talking to people. And it's like, that's why the podcast started, because I enjoyed talking to people on the phone with no time limit and no expectations, and just wanted to get to know their soul. So to me, it's like, the more I enjoyed my own company, the more I wanted to spread my own company with other people, AKA communicate. And the more I wanted to communicate, the better I got at communicating. And the better I got at communicating, the more people who wanted to communicate with me. Fascinating how that works, right?
Yeah, it's a circular effect. What I love about it, the medium, is like I'm sitting in my office, in my home, and I'm talking to you, and we're having a one-on-one conversation, which is something that drives me. I love the one-on-one. I don't like the crowd. I love the one-on-one. And I get to do this, and then a bunch of people get to listen to it later. So I get the crowd effect, but we're in an intimate setting here. It's you and me in the room, and we're able to go to places that we wouldn't go maybe in a bigger setting. And that is what I love about the medium.
Dude, that's such a great point. And, it very much speaks to my own nature as well. Of like, I went to a party last night and I just took someone and I was like, we're talking one-on-one. Like in my head, that's what I said. And we just spoke for 2 hours when we have this huge party, or 3 hours, and like the whole party evaporated. And it was like, would we actually be talking about the situations in each other's childhoods if we were surrounded by 7 people? There is no chance. And what is that? Right? Like there's something important there. That is the space and the energy of the situation and the energy that each person brings to it. Because when we're talking about something deep and significant to us, we're fine going there if we know that each person there can also handle that.
Exactly.
And so with you, like talking to you, I feel like, it feels like you've done some work on yourself. It feels like you're at peace. You're listening to what I'm saying. I'm listening to what you're saying. We're both in this container together.
Yeah.
And that's what a podcast is. And then what's so cool is people can hear that container and be like, oh, that was pretty interesting what those guys talked about. Why was it interesting? Because we were able to hold space for each other in this one like space that we've created.
Yeah, I love how you said that. And I think the add I would make is that space and that container you need to make for the conversations with yourself as well.
Yes. It starts there.
Yeah, like the real stuff we're talking about, the presence and the energy that we're providing to each other right here. People have to do that right here. And yourself is the person sitting across from you. You have to figure out how to listen to what you're feeling, what your body is saying, what you want, what your desires are, what your fears are, in order to change. Period.
Yes. And often I'll talk to someone and I could tell they're not listening to me. And my first instinct is to get frustrated. Like, what's going, like, what? But then I realize my second response and what I actually sit with myself and say is, oh my God, that is the voice in their own head. Right. They are not listening to themselves. What they're doing in this moment is just a reflection of what they're doing to themselves all the time. And that's painful to live in that reality. And I have lived in that reality myself. So I know it's what you say is so true. It's like the presence that you can give to someone else is only based on the presence you have already given to yourself.
Right. So I know your podcast is the Danny Miranda podcast. And I know you did that intentionally because you didn't want to be constrained. You didn't want to be put in a box in terms of where your conversations could go. In the face of what we hear advice-wise, right, of niche down, get really specific, these types of things. I know you've probably had some back and forth in your head of, what is the theme of my show, or what should that be? And I'm curious, after 400 episodes that you've recorded, do you have any hypotheses about how you, not that you have to niche, but how you would characterize the theme of your show? What are some common things that are coming out of your guests that would give you an inkling as to how you would characterize the show if somebody was coming to the Dan and Miranda show?
Yeah, I would say part of the reason why I've been hesitant to change the name or to help people understand is because I don't want to buy into someone else's frame. Yeah. Because I've lived that.
You've learned that lesson.
And I've learned that lesson. Exactly. Yeah. But I will say, I would characterize the show as helping the guests understand themselves better by holding a mirror up to them. And the way we do that is by exploring some of their most interesting or insightful ideas to me and spitting it back to them, getting their feedback on it, and helping them understand themselves better by virtue of their ideas and their experiences. And that's very broad, but it's like a therapy session. It's not a therapy session because therapy I view as going from -5 to 0. It's more of a coaching session in some way of helping people go from +5 often to +10, where they're already above baseline. And I'm just helping them flesh out and understand who they truly are and what the things that they've done says about them and their soul.
It makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of resisting the box. I'm a guy that I gotta have my back to the wall. I can't ever have a box around me. And I think you've proven that your curiosity and your willingness to go to different places is a strength. And I think it's certainly why I listen to the show. I don't need to look at it and say, oh, it's about this and that resonates with me. No, I want the conversation. I want to know this person better. And I frankly want to know you better as the host too. And I think that comes across, both ways, which is really interesting to me. Part of that is the idea of building connection. And so you are really good at that. I feel like this is a skill for anyone, not just podcasters, but anyone, especially in this digital age, right? We have different mediums of communication, in person, video, chat, whatever it might be. And I feel like you've mastered this. You kind of are putting some of this out in your course as well and about podcasting, but sort of reaching a larger audience. What have you found are the keys to establishing connection and rapport with somebody really quickly, in this setting or maybe just in like a business setting?
Yeah, I would say showing effort and care. We all appreciate effort and care. And so I don't know how that might look for everyone. I'll give you the example for how I do it in the podcast. One like small way that anyone can really take is when I do an in-person episode, 97% of the time, I will bring a water for the guest. And that simple gesture says so much. It's cost me $3, but it says, I care about you. I want you to drink and I want you to be nourished. And I'm here for you. This is a gift, right? And they're not thinking all that. Probably it doesn't go through their head consciously, I would imagine. But it does say like, this is my intention. This is who I am. I want to give you something. And then hopefully it continues, right? It continues by me when I greet them, be like, all right, the bathroom's over here, right? This is like, we can stop at any time. This is your show. We can cut out anything at this. I just want you to be happy. And then it goes into the show. And the first question is about what was your psychologist like at 17 and what did that teach you? Right. And it's like that. Then they're like, whoa, this is something different than what I've experienced. Now I feel really connected to this guy. Where did he find that? That's crazy. Like, I didn't realize I said that. And now we're in a whole new level because they're not approaching this like this is just any old day. And then the deeper part is I'm sitting with them and listening. I'm not just saying, all right, what was your psychologist like at 17? All right, what was your seventh grade history? Like, all right. I'm like, it's not like that. It's like, okay, you said something. I want to understand how does this feel in real time based on what you said and my experiences. And now I'm filtering it in and now I'm coming back with something else. And people are like, wow, that's sweet. I feel connected to this person. So that's a little bit of the process, but it's work. I thought I was good at it on episode 39 when I was talking to Gary Vaynerchuk. And I look at that now and I'm like, I was not connected to him. I was nervous that there was 30 minutes. That was the first 30-minute episode that I ever did. And I had no presence and no ability to really like sit with him a little. There were inklings, but it's very much a learned skill and a result of doing it 400 plus times. Yeah.
That's really good advice for people. I think, the bar is really low to improve with this, right? It's eye contact, but nothing else in the room matters except you, right? Like, that's the appreciation and care, I think, that is super easy to do, but often overlooked.
You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
I got a few more questions for you. I'm going to do something really selfish first. I would love, now that we've been through, I don't know, almost an hour, do a teardown with me on how I've done so far and the premise of the podcast and all of that. And you can be bad. You can be mean to me. That's okay.
I think it's phenomenal. What's interesting to me, and this is what I was just thinking about, was how your presence doesn't cross over to the outreach. Like, I did not realize I was going to be talking to a present person.
Interesting.
And I didn't have any perspective of you, but I was curious. I'm curious now, how do you bake the presence into the outreach process? And I know you sent the video and that was cool, but I didn't get that present. I wasn't like, this is a super present person, which is interesting to think about. But I feel like you are a very present person based on talking for the last hour.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I wonder that's gotten to have my wheels turning for a while of how do I communicate that in a different medium, right?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and listen, I've been interviewed a bunch, and you are amongst the most present people that I've spoke to. So I would ask myself, like, okay, what is my like profile picture? Or like if you want to be characterized that way, right? Like this is kind of just like what I'm thinking. And this is not true. This is just my filter. And so like just go through all the processes and ask yourself, like, how would you bake in more presence to
I think that is a really, really good takeaway for me.
Cool.
I'm gonna be thinking about that for a long time.
In a room by yourself.
In a room by myself, for sure. Yeah.
Well, how did you build that presence?
Frankly, I think it's a long evolution. I think, if you were interviewing me and I was telling you my life story, I would say I was a pretty uptight, hard-headed type A, when I was younger, and wasn't getting the total success that I wanted, and just had a few break moments that changed my view of what I could do and who I could be and what I wanted to be. And I think it was one of those things where conversing and dropping all distraction made sense to me. I think some of my strengths are in verbal communication. So I thought about it from a very practical standpoint of how do I create advantage? How do I use that talent? Okay, it's by being one-on-one. I just like the one-on-one anyway. Like, I'm an introvert by nature. So I'm totally the guy that would grab a friend in a large crowd and we'd go sit in the corner for 2 hours, just like you. And I'd like to have very meaningful conversations. I really can't stand surface level chit chat. It bores me to death, and I will probably get up and walk away. Like I can be abrupt like that sometimes. But when I get to do this, it lights me up. And that's how I would describe it. So I don't think I was always like this, but I think over time you learn, well, how are you projecting yourself in the world, right? And I tuned into that and I listened, and okay, how can I do that better? And I think it's just, manifested in that way. And I think that's also, okay, I love this coaching idea. I love the idea of being able to help people through a very hard time. And you have to be able to be patient and present and non-judgmental through that, and cultivate questions and not have the answers, questions first, not answers. So all of that stuff has just been learned. It's probably taken me way too long to learn it. You're on the fast track there, buddy, but at least I'm continuing that journey onward and upward.
But you didn't answer the question though. Where did it come from? Like, where, I know it's like a gradual process, but like if you had to say like, these are the 3 things or the 2 things or the 1 thing that made the biggest difference in my own presence, what would it be?
Okay. I would definitely say having kids.
Oh, interesting.
Completely changed my life. Completely reoriented everything that I ever wanted to do in life. you have, like, I was never a patient person, and you just by default have to be patient with kids. And
Life takes time.
Yeah. And they're, irrational, illogical, all of that stuff, right? They don't have that mental capacity to think the way you do. But you can see the fragility in them. And so I think when I would drop to my knees and get on their level and talk straight with my eyes, peering right into them, and nothing else in the world mattered, they pick up on that.
Mm.
When I'm on my phone tweeting to Danny Miranda or something, they know that that's happening. And so we've created rules and boundaries about all of that stuff, co-created it with my kids, these rules. And I think that is probably the number one thing that has changed my presence. And I think what I've realized is that with adults, it's the same thing. Like the way that you talk to a child, you want to talk to a child like an adult, but explain everything and explain the why. And that skill is exactly, I think, how you get the most out of coaching people as well.
Interesting. And what are the rules that you made?
So like I tell my, phones and devices are sort of central to a lot of things. I work at different hours and times. And one of the things I say is, all right, if I am ever on my phone in front of you, even if we're just like watching TV and we're not right here and you don't want me to be, you get to take it.
Oh, I love that.
Doesn't matter what I'm doing. I could be in the middle of, tweeting something at you, right? And they can just take it and put it away. So that's number one.
Have they ever done that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All the time. It's like they feel comfortable to take
I tell them I remind them too. If it hasn't happened in a while, I remind them. I'm like, hey, we're not engaged right now, but I'm doing a little work, or I'm reading something, because I read on a phone, right? Like might be reading a book, but I say, no, you can take it. And they do that with me.
Love that.
Yeah. So that's one. They can come in to this room in my office whenever they want, unless I'm on a podcast. But if I'm working, I work here. It's in my house. They're able to come in the door at any time for any reason. I call it open office hours. And obviously they're at school most of the day, but they can pop in here whenever. So little things like that. I just want them to know that like they come first.
Yeah, that's a very cool way to actually. A lot of people say that, but like to do it in practice with the phone, I think is phenomenal. And then you said that was the biggest one. Are there any other? Yeah, 2 or 3 things that have built presence.
That's the biggest one. And I think evolution of being married as well. My wife and I are high school sweethearts. We've been together for a very long time. We obviously have 3 kids. She works as well. And so there's a lot of sort of ships passing in the night at our house. She's a doctor and, I do my thing. So cultivating that time where there's nothing else except us to check in and trying to protect that time is definitely, it's a work in progress. And that's been learned through periods of neglect, right? You have kids in diapers and you don't get along because you're worried about how we're parenting kids and all that kind of stuff. And then you realize, okay, that's broken. That doesn't feel right. How do we go about making this better? And it comes down to, I think, presence.
Beautiful. That's so interesting. It wasn't any specific practice. It was kids and marriage.
Yeah.
I love that. That means we have a deepening of presence coming.
Yeah.
God willing, in the next 10 years.
Yeah, for sure.
Currently single.
Right. Right. But yeah, you've got an up level coming. And when that happens, you can tap me on the shoulder for any advice that you need. So
appreciate that.
All right, man. I got a couple more questions and I'll let you go. I know we're getting on there with time, but what is the biggest thing you've had to unlearn on your journey in life?
I think it's other people's opinions and valuing them more than my own. I think you grow up and you are taught this is how someone else views the world, and it is correct. And if it is not, and if you don't believe it's correct, you're going to fail this test. And that's reinforced so many times. And I'm sure I'm still living in the soup by which I talk about. In some sense, it's like, why am I doing a podcast? What's going like? But I have done so well by virtue of stepping outside of it and stepping outside of my mind and stepping outside of what other people's expectations are or how they view I should view my life. And as a result, my life has become so joyful. I've been able to infuse so much energy and love into the people that I talk to. And I really am like, I'm transcending, transcending a version of myself that couldn't do this. So the biggest thing I've unlearned is taking and valuing other people's perspectives greater than my own.
Love that. And I think a lot of people that I talk to and coach need to hear that, because that is a huge limiter and barrier to them transcending themselves as well. So I'm glad you said that. Is there anything that you learned about yourself in our time together?
Great question. I
know it's one of yours, so that's why I figured I'd flip it on you.
Well, it's funny because I tell people at the start, my intention for this is to help you learn something about yourself. But I never ask at the end.
Oh.
Which is interesting now that I think about it. Because if that's my intention, then I should follow up and ask. Mainly, I think because I'm scared that I don't that they won't have learned something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. and so I'm scared to put myself out there in that sense because it's been such a vulnerable time. But yeah, I would say I have. I feel like we went to places in this one, particularly about the presence, and particularly I've learned that there are people older than me who are able to take something from the message. And it's something I knew, but it's a deeper knowing when it stares you right directly in your eyes, in your face, right? And I appreciate that. And so the first thing you said in the intro was like, I learned something about myself in that moment, right? So thank you. Thank you for doing what you do. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. And I was scared to ask that question as well.
It's a hard one, right?
Yeah. Worried if it didn't happen. What's he going to say if it didn't happen? Awesome. We're going to have links in the show notes to everything that we've talked about, where people can find you and all of that good stuff, your course and everything, which I have to get through. And maybe we can do another episode at some point and grade my before and after after I take the course, which would be hilarious. But the last question I want to ask you is to try to bring this back home to mom and grandma. What are they praying for you right now? If you are struggling with anything, or if there's anything that they are thinking about for you, what are they praying for?
Well, for my grandma, I'm praying for health and her brain, her heart and her brain is what she told me to pray for her for. I think they're praying for my endless happiness, which they've been doing for a long time. And probably it's part of the reason why I have health and happiness is because they've been looking over me while still being in their physical body here on earth. It's a really special thing to have what I pray for myself for and what my grandparents and mother pray for me as well. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we're happy they are around, and we're happy that they are supporting you on your mission. And I wish you all the best as you continue. And I am just absolutely super stoked to continue watching your progression and to continue learning from you and other young folks like you. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate the thoughtful interview, and I'm excited to see what your children do on this planet Earth because they've got a really good dad.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that, buddy.